If Max hadn't knocked that photo off the wall, I never would have known someone had been living inside my house. That's the first sentence I blurted out when the sheriff asked why I was crying so hard. And even as I said it, part of me still couldn't believe it. Max is my Labrador. He's big, friendly, and not exactly the stealthiest dog in the world, but he's sharp in his own way, always sniffing out squirrels, staring at nothing in particular like he hears something I don't, or pawing at spots on the wall like they're calling to him. It used to seem quirky. Now it makes my stomach tighten. The morning it all started was just like any other. I'd brewed a pot of coffee, slipped on my worn flannel shirt, and fed Max his usual scoop of kibble. We were living alone now, just the two of us. Ever since Dad passed 6 months ago, the house felt quieter than usual. Too quiet. I sat down in the den, that room filled with family pictures and old books. My eyes lingered on the photo above the fireplace. A family picture from Christmas years ago. Everyone was there. Me, Mom, Dad, my brother Dean, and Max, who was just a floppy-eared pup at the time. Max stared at that picture a lot. I'd caught him before, just sitting on his haunches and looking up at it like it meant something. But that morning, he started, doing more than stare. He walked right up to the wall beneath it and began to paw. Not his usual playful tap, but a persistent, frantic scratching. "What is it, boy?" I murmured, setting my coffee down. He didn't stop, his claws clicking against the plaster. I knelt beside him, running my hand along the wall. It felt solid, ordinary. Then I noticed it. A slight unevenness, a hairline crack I'd never seen before, hidden just beneath the frame of the photo. Curiosity piqued, I gently pulled the picture aside. The crack was more pronounced now, a jagged line that seemed to separate a small section of the wall from the rest. Hesitantly, I pressed on the area. To my surprise, it gave way slightly. It wasn't solid wall, but something hollow. My heart began to thump in my chest. What was this? With a bit more pressure, a small section of the wall popped inward, revealing a narrow opening. It was dark inside, and a musty smell wafted out, like old earth and something else. Something indefinable and slightly unsettling. "Max, look," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He whined softly, nudging his head against my hand, his body tense. I reached into the opening, my fingers brushing against something papery. I pulled it out. It was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The handwriting was undeniably Dad's, but it was a script I hadn't seen in years. Hurried and less precise than his usual neat cursive. "Sarah," it read, "if you're reading this, then Max has shown you. There are things in this house you don't know about, things I kept hidden. Don't trust what you see. There's someone here. Always has been." The words hit me like a physical blow. Someone here. Living. In our house. A cold wave of fear washed over me, followed by a surge of disbelief. This had to be some kind of mistake. A strange prank. Dad had always had a peculiar sense of humor. But this felt different. I looked around the den, suddenly seeing it in a new, sinister light. The familiar furniture seemed to loom. The shadows in the corners deepened, and the silence was no longer just quiet, but expectant. Driven by a morbid curiosity and a growing sense of dread, I started to examine the walls more closely. I tapped along the plaster, listening for any change in sound. It was slow, tedious work, but after an hour, I found another hollow spot in the hallway, near the baseboard. This one was smaller, and with some effort, I pried it open with a butter knife. Inside was another folded piece of paper. This note was shorter, the handwriting even more frantic. "The attic. Look in the attic. They know I know." My breath hitched. They? Who were they? And what did Dad know? The attic. I hadn't been up there in months, not since putting away the Christmas decorations. It was dusty and filled with forgotten memories. Now, it seemed, it held a darker secret. Max whined again, nudging my hand insistently, his gaze fixed on the ceiling above. He knew. Somehow, he knew. With a mix of trepidation and grim determination, I pulled down the attic stairs. The familiar scent of dust and old wood filled my nostrils. Sunlight filtered weakly through the small, grimy window at the far end. The air was still and heavy. I moved slowly, my footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. Cardboard boxes filled, with old clothes and forgotten toys lined the walls. Cobwebs clung to everything. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then I saw it. In the far corner, tucked behind a stack of old photo albums, was a small indentation in the dusty floorboards. Kneeling down, I ran my fingers along the edge. It was a trapdoor, cleverly concealed. My heart pounded in my chest. This had to be it. This had to be what Dad wanted me to find. With a grunt, I managed to lift the heavy wooden panel. A dark, narrow opening stared back at me, leading down into what looked like a crawl space. The musty smell was stronger here, accompanied by a faint, almost metallic odor. Hesitantly, I reached for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a low, cramped space. Cobwebs hung like macabre decorations. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Scattered on the dusty floor were small, seemingly random objects. A child's worn leather glove, a tarnished button, a single dried flower. And then, etched into the wooden floorboards, barely visible beneath a layer of dust, were faint scratch marks, lines, symbols. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the undeniable feeling of being watched. I shone the flashlight around the crawl space, my hand shaking. Nothing. Just dust and shadows. "Hello," I called out, my voice a shaky whisper. Silence. I retreated from the opening, pulling the trapdoor shut. The air in the attic suddenly felt thick and suffocating. Someone had been down there, recently, perhaps. Back in the relative safety of the den, I tried to make sense of everything. Dad's cryptic notes, the hidden crawl space, the unsettling objects. It felt like I had stumbled into the middle of a mystery, a dark secret that had been hidden within the walls of my own home. Max nudged my hand again, his eyes filled with a worried intensity. He seemed to sense my fear, my confusion. I knelt down and hugged him tightly, his warm fur a small comfort in the growing unease. I knew I couldn't ignore this. I had to know what Dad had been trying to tell me. Who was living in our house? And what were these secrets he had kept hidden for so long? The next morning, I found another note. This one was tucked inside the frame of the Christmas photo, right where Max had been pouring. The handwriting was different this time, smaller and more angular. "He knows about Russell." The words sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Russell? Who was Russell? And how did they know that Dad knew about him? The feeling of being watched intensified. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside the window made me jump. I started locking all the doors and windows at night, a sense of paranoia creeping into my thoughts. Days turned into a week. I found more notes, each one more cryptic and unsettling than the last. They were hidden in strange places. Behind loose floorboards, inside hollowed-out books, even tucked into the pockets of Dad's old clothes. "He took him. Don't trust the basement. The fireplace hides the truth." The fireplace. Dad's first note had mentioned someone always being here. Had they been living behind the sealed-up fireplace, in the den? It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was mounting. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I decided to investigate the fireplace. It was a large brick structure, cold and unused since we switched to central heating years ago. I ran my hands along the bricks, feeling for any loose ones, any indication of a hidden opening. After a thorough examination, I found it. A single brick, slightly discolored and a fraction of an inch out of alignment with the others. With careful pressure, it slid inward, revealing a small, dark space. I shone my phone's flashlight into the opening. It was a narrow passage, barely wide enough to squeeze through. The air that wafted out was thick with dust and a strange, sweet odor I couldn't quite place. Hesitantly, I squeezed through the opening. The passage led to a small, hidden chamber behind the fireplace. The air was stale and still. In the center of the room was a single, overturned wooden chair and a scattering of what looked like bones. Small bones. My stomach lurched. Animal bones? Or something else? On the far wall, etched in what looked like dried blood, were more of those strange symbols I had seen in the crawl space. And beneath them, a single word. Russell. The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a terrifying picture. Russell. The notes. The hidden spaces. Someone had been living in this house, leaving these cryptic messages, and they knew something about someone named Russell, someone my father knew about. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked upstairs. Max, who had been silent and tense beside me, let out a low growl. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears. I wasn't alone. Slowly, cautiously, I began to back out of the hidden chamber, my eyes fixed on the opening. The creaking sound came again, closer this time. Someone was in the house. Panic seized me. I scrambled back through the narrow passage, replacing the loose brick as quickly as I could. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the brick. Once, it was back in place. I stood there for a moment, my breath coming in ragged gasps, listening. The house was silent again. Had I imagined it? Or was someone really there? Max was still growling softly, his ears perked, his gaze fixed on the ceiling. He hadn't imagined it. I knew I had to get out of the house. Now. Whatever was going on here, it was dangerous. I grabbed Max's leash and my keys, my hands still trembling. As I reached the front door, I noticed something on the floor. Another note. This one was written on a small, torn piece of paper, the handwriting shaky and desperate. He's still here. I didn't wait any longer. I opened the door and practically dragged Max out, locking it behind us. We stood on the porch, the morning sun, casting long shadows, the familiar comfort of the outside world, a stark contrast to the terror I felt inside. I looked back at the house, its familiar facade now seeming sinister and alien. Someone had been living there, hidden within its walls. They knew about Russell, and they knew that Dad knew. Who was Russell? And what had happened to him? I knew one thing for sure. My life had just been irrevocably changed. The quiet solitude I had found after Dad's death had been shattered, replaced by a terrifying mystery that was unfolding within the very walls of my home. And Max, my loyal companion, seemed to be the only one who truly understood the darkness that had taken root there. The porch felt exposed, the familiar swing set in the yard suddenly seeming like a relic from a safer, simpler time. I gripped Max's leash tightly, my knuckles white. The morning air, usually crisp and refreshing, now carried a hint of the musty odor I'd smelled in the hidden crawl space, a phantom reminder of the secrets within the house. "We need to go to the police," I said aloud, the sound of my own voice, surprisingly steady. Max whined softly, nudging his head against my leg as if in agreement, but as I started to move towards my car, a thought stopped me cold. The note. He's still here. If someone was indeed still inside the house, would calling the police immediately put me in danger? Would it give them time to disappear, taking the secrets with them? I hesitated, torn between the instinct to seek help and a growing sense of paranoia. What if the police didn't believe me? How could I explain the hidden rooms, the cryptic notes? I had no real evidence, just my word and a few unsettling discoveries. "Okay, boy," I murmured to Max. "Not yet. First, we need to find out who this Russell is." My mind raced, trying to grasp any connection to that name. Had Dad ever mentioned a Russell? I searched my memories, sifting through years of conversations, but the name remained stubbornly unfamiliar. I decided to start with the most obvious resource, the internet. Back in the relative safety of my car, with Max panting anxiously in the passenger seat, I pulled out my phone and searched for missing person Russell. The search yielded countless results, a sobering reminder of the many unsolved disappearances. I added keywords like local, unsolved, and the years I remembered Dad being in his late teens and early 20s, hoping to narrow it down. Hours passed in a blur of scrolling through old news articles and missing person databases. There were several Russells who had gone missing over the years, each story a small tragedy. But none of the details seemed to connect to our small town or to the timeline I was vaguely piecing together. Frustration mounted. It felt like I was grasping at shadows. The cryptic notes offered no real information, just vague warnings and unsettling pronouncements. As the afternoon wore on, I drove to the local library, hoping that old newspaper archives might yield more clues. The librarian, Mrs. Gable, a kind woman who had known my family for years, greeted me with a warm smile. "Sarah, dear, it's been a while. What can I help you find today?" "Mrs. Gable, I was hoping you might have some information on old local news." "Articles," I said, trying to sound casual. "Something from maybe 30 or 40 years ago." "Of course, dear. We have microfilm records going back decades. Is there a particular topic you're interested in?" I hesitated. How could I explain my vague search without sounding completely unhinged? "Just local events," I said finally. "Anything unusual?" Mrs. Gable raised a curious eyebrow but nodded. Nonetheless, she led me to a dusty corner of the library where the microfilm reader hummed quietly. She showed me how to access the archives and left me to my search. The next few hours were spent hunched over the flickering screen, scrolling through grainy images of old newspaper pages. I searched for keywords like missing child, unsolved, mystery, and any unusual incidents that might have occurred in our town decades ago. The process was slow and tedious. Most of the articles were about local politics, town events, and the occasional small-town crime. Just as I was starting to feel discouraged, a headline caught my eye. "Local boy vanishes without a trace." The article was dated August 14th, 1987. The missing boy's name was Russell Hayes. My heart skipped a beat. This had to be him. The article detailed the disappearance of 8-year-old Russell, who had been staying with a family friend while his parents were out of town. The family friend was not named in the article, only referred to as a trusted acquaintance. Russell had reportedly been playing in the backyard and was simply gone when the acquaintance checked on him later. A wave of dizziness washed over me. 1987. That would have made Dad around 20 years old. Could he have been the trusted acquaintance? The timeline fit. I frantically scrolled through subsequent articles. There were follow-up reports, police appeals for information, and eventually, the case went cold. Russell Hayes was never found. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to click into place, forming a dark and disturbing image. Dad's cryptic notes, the mention of Russell, the hidden spaces in the house, it all seemed to point to some long-buried secret connected to this missing boy. But what was that secret, and what did it have to do with someone living in the walls of my house now? As I left the library, the weight of my discoveries pressed down on me. I felt a desperate need to talk to someone, to share this terrifying burden. But who could I trust? The police might dismiss it as a grieving daughter's overactive imagination. My brother Dean lived out of state and had always been somewhat distant from the family's inner workings. I got back into my car, Max whimpering softly in the passenger seat. He seemed to sense my distress. I reached over and stroked his fur, finding a small measure of comfort in his familiar presence. "We need more answers, boy," I murmured. "And I think Dad left us more clues in the house." The thought of going back inside filled me with a sense of dread, but I knew I couldn't stay away. The truth, however terrifying, was hidden within those walls, and I had to uncover it. As we drove back home, I remembered one of Dad's notes. "The fireplace hides the truth. I had found the hidden chamber behind it, the small bones, the symbols, the name Russell scrawled on the wall. But what did it all mean? And then another note flashed in my mind. He's still here. The chilling implication sent a shiver down my spine. Was the person who had been living in the house connected to Russell's disappearance? Were they still hiding somewhere within those walls, watching me? I pulled into the driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The house stood silent and, still, its familiar windows now seeming like vacant eyes staring back at me. "Okay, Max," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let's go back inside, but we have to be careful." With Max cautiously leading the way, we re-entered the house. The silence inside felt heavier now, charged with an unseen presence. Every shadow seemed to flicker. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump. I made my way back to the den and knelt before the fireplace. I ran my hands over the bricks, feeling for the loose one. As my fingers brushed against it, I noticed something I had missed before. Scratched into the brick, almost invisible beneath a layer of soot, was a small symbol. It was the same symbol I had seen etched on the wall of the hidden chamber. A wave of understanding washed over me. The notes, the hidden spaces, the symbols. It was all connected. Someone had been trying to communicate, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs. But who? And why? And then I remembered Dad's first note. "Don't trust what you see. There's someone here, always has been. Always has been." The words echoed in my mind. Could someone have been living hidden in the house for years, perhaps even since Russell disappeared? It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was mounting. I looked at Max, who was now pouring insistently at the base of the fireplace. He seemed agitated, more so than before. Following his lead, I ran my hand along the baseboard. Just as I had found hidden compartments in the hallway and den, my fingers brushed against a slight give in the wood. With a bit of pressure, a small panel slid open, revealing another hidden space. This one was different. It was larger, deeper. A narrow tunnel stretched into the darkness. The air that wafted out was thick and stale, carrying a stronger scent of that strange, sweet odor I had noticed before. Max whined and tried to pull away, his body trembling. He didn't want to go in there, but I knew I had to. This tunnel, hidden behind the fireplace, felt like the key to everything. Taking a deep breath, I turned on my phone's flashlight and stepped into the darkness, Max reluctantly following behind. The tunnel was low and cramped, the rough stone walls cold against my hands. The air was heavy and still. As we moved deeper, the sweet odor grew stronger, almost cloying. And then I saw it. At the end of the tunnel, a faint light flickered. And as we drew closer, I realized it wasn't just light. It was a small chamber, and in the center of it, illuminated by a single flickering candle, sat a small wooden chair. And in the chair was a child's skeleton, small and fragile. My breath caught in my throat. Bile rose in my mouth. This had to be Russell. Etched into the wall beside the chair, in what looked like faded red crayon, was a drawing. A simple drawing of a Labrador, and beneath it, a single word. Max. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Max hadn't just been reacting to the hidden spaces. He had been trying to lead me to this. He had known. And then, a soft whisper seemed to echo in the small chamber. A faint, childlike voice that seemed to come from the very walls. He kept me safe. I spun around, my heart pounding, my flashlight beam dancing wildly. The chamber was empty save for the skeleton in the drawing. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Silence. Then the whisper came again, closer this time. He didn't mean to. Tears welled up in my eyes. This poor child. Russell. Had he been hidden here all these years? And who was he? My father. Suddenly the air in the chamber grew cold. The flickering candle flame danced erratically. A shadow seemed to coalesce in the corner of the room, taking on a vaguely human form. Fear gripped me, cold and paralyzing. I wasn't alone in this hidden place. And then, the shadowy figure spoke, its voice a low, mournful whisper. He loved you. The figure began to solidify, becoming clearer. It was a young boy, around 8 years old, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. Russell. He looked at me and then at Max, who was whimpering softly beside me. He tried to protect me, Russell whispered. The house, it takes things. It wanted me. My mind reeled. What was he talking about? The house. Russell reached out a translucent hand towards Max. You remember, he said softly. You always knew. Max whined again and nudged his head against the boy's spectral hand. He was lonely after I stayed, Russell continued, his voice barely audible. He felt guilty. He left the notes for you. He wanted you to know the truth. He gestured towards the drawing of Max on the wall. You were his guide. He knew you would find me. The weight of Russell's words crashed down on me. Dad hadn't been hiding a living person. He had been hiding the truth about a long-ago tragedy, a tragedy somehow connected to this house. And the person who had been living in the walls, had they been trying to communicate with me, trying to reveal the truth as well? Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet began to tremble. The walls of the small chamber seemed to pulse. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. Russell's spectral form flickered. It doesn't like that you know, he whispered urgently. You have to leave, now! The trembling intensified. Cracks appeared in the stone walls. The flickering candle went out, plunging us into darkness. Max barked frantically, pulling on his leash. I stumbled backward, fear lending me a surge of adrenaline. Come on, boy! I yelled, fumbling for my phone. The flashlight beam shook as I tried to find the tunnel entrance. The whispering started again, louder this time, swirling around us. It wasn't just Russell's voice anymore. There were other voices, faint and indistinct, murmuring from the walls themselves. We scrambled back through the narrow tunnel, the sounds growing louder, the darkness pressing in on us. When we finally burst back into the hidden chamber behind, the fireplace, the air in the den felt almost normal, though the lingering scent of dust and something ancient still hung in the air. I didn't hesitate. I replaced the loose brick, sealing the entrance to the tunnel. Then, grabbing Max, I ran out of the house, not stopping until we were far down the street. I stood there, panting, my heart still racing, looking back at the house. It seemed ordinary, again silent and still under the afternoon sun. But I knew the truth now. The house held a dark secret, a tragic past, and somehow, Max was connected to it all. I pulled out my phone, my hand shaking as I dialed the sheriff's number. This time, I had more than just a feeling. I had a story to tell. A story about a missing boy, hidden chambers, and whispers in the dark. And it all started with a dog pawing at a family photo. The sheriff arrived with 2 deputies, their expressions a mixture of concern and skepticism as I recounted my frantic story on the porch. I could see the doubt in their eyes, the unspoken question of whether grief had finally tipped me over the edge. "Hidden rooms, ma'am?" Sheriff Brody asked, his voice calm but laced with a hint of professional detachment. He was a stout man with a kind face, but I knew he'd seen his share of strange stories, and most of them had logical, if not mundane, explanations. "Yes," I insisted, my voice still trembling slightly. "Behind the fireplace in the den, and a crawl space in the attic, and I found bones, small bones. I think they might be human." Sheriff Brody's eyebrows rose. "Human bones, Sarah? Are you sure about that?" I don't know for sure," I admitted, the image of the fragile skeleton still vivid in my mind. But they were small, like a child's. He exchanged a look with one of the deputies, a younger man with a notepad in his hand. "All right, Sarah, let's take a look." I led them inside, Max padding nervously at my heels. The house felt different now, the oppressive silence replaced by the heavy presence of law enforcement. I pointed out the loose brick in the fireplace, the almost imperceptible seam that hid the entrance to the tunnel. Sheriff Brody examined it closely, running his fingers along the brick. He tried to push it, but it didn't budge. "Are you sure this opens?" he asked. "Yes," I said firmly. I went inside. There's a tunnel, a small chamber, and the bones. With a pry bar from their patrol car, the deputies carefully removed the brick. Sheriff Brody shone his flashlight into the opening. His expression remained neutral, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. He squeezed through the narrow opening, followed by one of the deputies. I waited anxiously in the den, Max whimpering and nudging my hand. The silence stretched, broken only by the muffled sounds from behind the fireplace. Finally, they emerged, their faces grim. "There is a tunnel, Sarah," Sheriff Brody confirmed, his voice low, "and a small chamber at the end. We did find what appear to be skeletal remains. We'll need to have them examined by the medical examiner to determine if they're human and how old they might be." A wave of relief washed over me, mixed with a fresh wave of nausea. They believed me, or at least they couldn't dismiss what they had seen. And there were drawings on the wall, I added. Symbols, and a drawing of Max, and the name Russell. The deputy who had been taking notes looked up sharply. "Russell? Did you say Russell?" "Yes," I replied, surprised by his reaction. "Why? Do you know someone named Russell?" The deputy hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There was a missing person case, a long time ago. A little boy named Russell Hayes. He disappeared, from town back in the 80s. It was never solved." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. Russell Hayes, the missing boy from the newspaper articles, the bones in the hidden chamber. It all pointed to a tragedy that had been buried within the walls of my own home for decades. Sheriff Brody looked at me, his expression now a mixture of concern and a dawning understanding. "Sarah, did your father live in this house back in the 80s? "Yes," I said. "He grew up here. Our family has lived here for generations." The implications hung heavy in the air. Had my father been involved in Russell's disappearance? The thought was horrifying, almost unbearable, but the evidence, however strange, seemed to suggest a connection. The sheriff and his deputies spent the rest of the day at my house. They carefully documented the hidden tunnel and chamber, collecting the skeletal remains and the drawings. They asked me countless questions about my father, his past, and anything he might have said about a boy named Russell. I told them everything I could remember, about the cryptic notes, Max's strange behavior, the unsettling feeling in the house. I even mentioned the whispers I thought I had heard in the hidden chamber, though I knew how unbelievable that must sound. As the sun began to set, they secured the house, promising to continue their investigation. They advised me to stay elsewhere for the night, and I gratefully accepted, taking Max with me to a local motel. The sterile environment of the motel room offered a stark contrast to the secrets and shadows of my house. Yet, even there, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the echo of whispers in the silence. Sleep was fitful and plagued by nightmares. Shadowy figures in hidden tunnels, a small, sad face, and the insistent pouring of Max. The next day brought more investigators, forensic teams meticulously examining every inch of the hidden spaces. They found no other remains, no signs of forced entry, nothing to definitively explain how Russell Hayes might have ended up in that hidden chamber. The medical examiner's preliminary report confirmed that the bones were indeed those of a child, likely around the age Russell would have been when he disappeared. But determining the cause of death would take more time. As the investigation continued, I found myself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. Grief for my father was now tangled with suspicion and a profound sense of betrayal. Had he been hiding this terrible secret all these years? Had he lived with the knowledge of Russell's fate? And then there were the notes, the cryptic warnings, the insistence that someone was still in the house. Had those notes been left by my father, a belated attempt to reveal the truth, or by someone else, someone who had also been living in the shadows? The thought of a hidden presence in my home, watching me, was deeply unsettling. I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to find any clue I might have missed. The sweet odor in the tunnel, the feeling of cold, the whispers. Sheriff Brody and his team found no evidence of anyone currently living in the hidden spaces. They theorized that the crawl spaces and tunnels might have been forgotten parts of the old house, perhaps used for storage or even as part of an old ventilation system. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. The intensity of Max's reactions, the specific locations of the notes, the feeling of a presence. It all felt too deliberate, too connected. Days turned into weeks. The investigation continued, but progress was slow. The medical examiner's final report was inconclusive regarding the cause of death. There were no obvious signs of trauma. The mystery of Russell Hayes' disappearance and the discovery of his remains in my house became a local sensation, dredging up old memories and unanswered questions. Grant Hayes, Russell's father, who still lived in town, was contacted. He was understandably devastated by the news, the decades of uncertainty finally replaced by a heartbreaking reality. I met with Mr. Hayes, a frail, elderly man with sad eyes. He told me about Russell, his bright smile, his love for animals. He remembered my father vaguely, as someone who had occasionally helped him with odd jobs around his house. He had no idea that Russell had been staying with him before he disappeared. As I listened to Mr. Hayes, a chilling thought occurred to me. What if my father hadn't been directly responsible for Russell's death? What if he had simply discovered the body and, for reasons unknown, had chosen to hide it? The fear and guilt he expressed in his letter suddenly took on a different light. But that still didn't explain the person who had been living in the walls, the cryptic notes, the feeling of being watched. One afternoon, while the police were still occasionally searching the house, I found another note. This one was tucked inside the frame of the Christmas photo again, right where Max had first poured. The handwriting was the same small, angular script as the note that mentioned Russell. He knows you know. The sense of paranoia returned, stronger than ever. Someone was still watching. Someone knew what I had discovered. I decided to take matters into my own hands. While the police focused on the physical evidence, I started my own investigation into the history of the house. I pored over old property records at the town hall, hoping to find any clues about its original construction or any unusual features. The house was old, dating back to the early 1900s. The records were sparse, but I did find one interesting detail. The original blueprints showed a series of small, interconnected spaces behind the main walls, labeled simply as air shafts and storage. They were not meant to be living spaces, but they could potentially be accessed through hidden openings. Could someone have been living in these forgotten spaces for years, undetected? It seemed like a far-fetched idea, but it was the only explanation that made sense of the hidden notes and the feeling of a presence. And then I remembered something else Dad had written. The fireplace hides the truth. I had found Russell's remains behind it. But what if there was another layer to that truth? Driven by a hunch, I returned to the den and examined the fireplace again. I ran my hands over the bricks, feeling for any other loose ones. This time, I noticed a slight discoloration on one of the bricks near the top. It was almost the same color as the surrounding bricks, but the texture felt different. With careful effort, I managed to dislodge it. Behind it was another small opening, much smaller than the one leading to the tunnel. I shone my flashlight inside. It was a narrow shaft leading upwards. Hesitantly, I reached inside and pulled out a small, dusty object. It was a child's wooden block painted with a faded blue letter, R. My breath caught in my throat. Russell's block. And then, tucked behind it, was another note. This one was written in a shaky, childlike hand. He's mean. He keeps me here. A wave. of horror washed over me. This note. It felt like it was written by Russell himself. But how? And who was he? I reached back into the shaft and pulled out another note, also in a child's handwriting. I miss Max. My heart ached. Russell had known Max. Had Max somehow been aware of his presence all along? I continued to reach into the shaft, pulling out more small objects, a tarnished toy car, a smooth grey stone, and more of those simple drawings, often featuring a dog that looked like Max. And with each object, there were more notes, each one a heartbreaking glimpse into a child's hidden world. He says, I can't leave. It's cold and dark. I hear noises in the walls. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, revealing a far more sinister picture than I could have imagined. Someone had been keeping Russell hidden in the house, perhaps even before he was reported missing. And that someone had likely been living in those hidden spaces, watching, controlling. And then I remembered Dad's first note again. Don't trust what you see. There's someone here. Always has been. The someone wasn't a ghost. It was a living person. A person who had been hiding within the walls of my house for years, perhaps even decades. A person who had kept Russell hidden, and who had likely been the one leaving those cryptic notes, perhaps trying to communicate in their own twisted way, or maybe even trying to frame my father, the sweet odor in the tunnel. It suddenly clicked. It wasn't the smell of decay. It was the sickly sweet smell of something used to sedate a child, the cold I had felt in the hidden chamber. It wasn't supernatural. It was the cold of a hidden, unheated space. The whispers. They weren't ghosts. They were the sounds of someone, moving within the walls. The realization was terrifying. I wasn't just dealing with a decades-old tragedy. I was dealing with someone who was still here, still hiding, still capable of unimaginable cruelty. And Max had known all along. He had sensed Russell's presence, the hidden passages, the lingering darkness in the house. His pawing at the wall hadn't been quirky behavior. It had been a desperate attempt to communicate, to show me the secrets hidden within the walls. I looked at Max, who was sitting patiently beside me, his intelligent eyes fixed on mine. A wave of gratitude washed over me. He had been my guide, just as Dad's last note had suggested. I knew what I had to do. The police were focused on the past. I had to focus on the present. There was someone still living in my house, someone who had held a child captive and who was likely still watching me. And this time, I wouldn't wait for them to make a move. I would find them. The revelation that someone had been living undetected within the walls of my house sent a chill deeper than any ghost story. The idea that I had been sharing my home with an unseen presence, someone who had held a child captive and left those unsettling notes, fueled a potent mix of fear and anger. My immediate instinct was to call the police again, to tell them about the hidden notes from Russell, the drawings, the implication of a long-term captivity. But a hesitant voice in the back of my mind urged caution. This hidden resident had remained undetected for years. Alerting them might simply drive them deeper into the labyrinthine walls, making them even harder to find. I needed a plan. I needed to understand the layout of these hidden spaces, how they connected to the main house. The old blueprints I had, found at the town hall, were a starting point, but they were basic, showing only the general outline of the air shafts and storage. They didn't reveal any specific access points beyond the few I had already stumbled upon. Max, sensing my renewed agitation, stayed close, his ears perked, his nose twitching as if he could smell the hidden presence I was so desperate to find. He seemed more alert than he had been in days, a low growl rumbling in his chest whenever he looked towards the walls. I spent the next day poring over the blueprints again, trying to visualize the network of hidden spaces. They seemed to run primarily along the outer walls and around the fireplace, with a few narrower shafts extending upwards, possibly for ventilation. The chamber where I had found Russell's remains appeared to be located in a larger section behind, the den fireplace. The notes from Russell mentioned noises in the walls, This suggested that the hidden resident was mobile within these spaces, able to move between different sections. They had been aware of Russell, perhaps even interacting with him. The note, "He's mean. He keeps me here," painted a chilling picture of control and isolation. I started to pay closer attention to the subtle sounds within the house. The usual creaks and groans of an old building were now overlaid with a layer of suspicion. Was that a faint scraping sound from behind the wall? A barely audible shift in the attic? Driven by a need to see these hidden spaces for myself, to understand their layout and potential access points, I decided to try and find another way in. The tunnel behind the fireplace was narrow and claustrophobic. There had to be other entrances. Focused my search on the areas where I had found the hidden notes, the hallway baseboard, the hollow section beneath the Christmas photo. These seemed like deliberate access points used by the hidden resident to leave their cryptic messages. The opening behind the baseboard in the hallway was small, barely large enough to slip a hand through. Shining my flashlight inside revealed a narrow, dusty space that seemed to run along the outer wall. I couldn't see how to widen the opening without causing significant damage. The hollow section beneath the Christmas photo was more promising. After removing the picture, I carefully examined the edges of the opening. It seemed to be held in place by a series of small brads. With a thin screwdriver, I gently pried them loose. The section of wall came away, revealing a larger opening, into a narrow vertical shaft. The air that wafted out was stale and carried that familiar sweet odor, though fainter here. I shone my flashlight down the shaft. It was dark and descended out of sight. Could this lead to other parts of the hidden network? Hesitantly, I lowered myself into the opening, my feet finding purchase on some unseen ledge a short way down. The shaft was narrow, the plaster walls rough against my back. The sweet odor was stronger here, and I could hear faint, almost imperceptible sounds from below. A soft rustling, a muffled creak. Fear tightened its grip, but the need to know, to understand, pushed me onward. I continued to descend, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The shaft opened into a slightly wider space, a narrow passage that ran horizontally. The air here was thick with dust and the cloying sweetness. The faint sounds were more distinct now, the scuttling of small creatures, the almost inaudible drag of something across a surface. I moved cautiously along the passage, my senses on high alert. The walls were rough and uneven, and the low ceiling forced me to hunch over. The passage twisted and turned, disorienting me. I had no idea where I was in relation to the main house. Suddenly, I heard a distinct sound ahead, a soft, rhythmic breathing. My heart pounded in my chest. I wasn't alone down here. I moved forward slowly, my flashlight beam trained on the darkness ahead. The passage opened into a small, cramped space. And there, huddled in a corner, was a figure. Small and frail, wrapped in dirty blankets, my breath hitched. It wasn't the hidden resident I had been expecting. It was a child. Their eyes, wide and luminous in the dim light, stared back at me with a mixture of fear and confusion. Their face was pale and thin, their hair matted. They looked malnourished and terrified. Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The child didn't answer, just shrank further into the corner, their small body shaking. "It's okay," I said gently, trying to sound reassuring. "I'm not going to hurt you. Are you Russell?" The child's eyes widened even further. They nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. Russell. He was alive, but he was in terrible condition, hidden away in this dark, cramped space. The notes, the childlike handwriting. It had been him all along. But if Russell was alive, then who was the skeleton I had found in the chamber behind the fireplace? A cold dread washed over me. There had been 2 children. Who else is here? I asked softly, my gaze sweeping the small space. Russell just shook his head. his eyes darting nervously towards a dark opening in the wall. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the darkness. Max, who had been following close behind me, tensed, his hackles rising. A figure emerged from the opening, tall and gaunt, their face obscured by shadows, but there was a malevolent aura about them, a sense of coldness that sent a shiver down my spine. This had to be the hidden resident. They moved silently, their eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. They held something in their hand, something long and thin that glinted in the dim light of my flashlight. Fear surged through me, primal and overwhelming. I had found Russell, but I had also stumbled into something far more dangerous than I could have imagined. The figure lunged the upstairs. Hallway was dark and silent. Dust motes danced in the faint light, filtering through a grimy window at the far end. The air was still, holding a sense of anticipation, like the quiet before a storm. Max remained at the bottom of the stairs, his barking having subsided into a low, guttural growl, his gaze fixed intently on the landing above. He seemed to know exactly where the hidden resident was. Clutching the iron poker, I moved slowly up the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. Russell clung to my back, his small hands gripping my shirt tightly. His fear was palpable, radiating off him in waves. As I reached the landing, I scanned the hallway. All the bedroom doors were closed. Which one was he hiding behind? Suddenly, a floorboard creaked inside the master bedroom, the one my parents had shared. Max's growl intensified. That was it. I moved cautiously towards the closed door, my senses on high alert. The silence was broken only by my own breathing and the soft whimpers coming from Russell behind me. I reached the door and hesitated, my hand hovering over the cold metal knob. What was waiting for me on the other side? Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. The room was dimly lit by the same grimy window at the end of the hall. Shadows danced in the corners, obscuring details. The air was stale and carried a faint, familiar, sweet odor. And then I saw him. He was standing by the far window, his back to me. He was tall and gaunt, just as I had glimpsed him in the hidden passage. His clothes were dark and ill-fitting, hanging loosely on his thin frame. His head was bowed, and his long, greasy hair obscured his face. He didn't seem to notice us at first. He was unnervingly still, as if listening for something. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly, but carrying more force than before. The figure stiffened. He turned slowly, and I finally saw his face. He was older than I expected, perhaps in his late 50s or early 60s. His face was pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken and shadowed. They flickered with a wild, unsettling intensity. His lips were thin and cracked, and a network of fine wrinkles crisscrossed his skin, etched by years of… what? Hiding. Fear. Madness. He didn't answer, just stared at me with those unnerving eyes. Then his gaze fell on Russell, who was peeking out from behind me. A strange expression flickered across his face, a mixture of fear and something else, possessiveness. He took a step towards us, and Max, sensing the threat, surged forward, barking ferociously. "Stay back," I warned again, raising the iron poker. He stopped, his eyes fixed on Max. He seemed wary of the dog. "What have you done to Russell?" I demanded. "Why were you keeping him hidden?" His voice, when it finally came, was raspy and weak, like it hadn't been used in a long time. "He belongs here." "No, he doesn't," I retorted. "He needs help. He needs to see a doctor. You can't just keep him locked away." "He's safe here," the man insisted, taking another hesitant step. "They can't get him here." "Who can't get him?" I asked, confused by his words. He didn't answer directly. His eyes darted around the room, as if he were afraid of unseen presences. "The house. It protects us." "The house," I repeated, a shiver running down my spine. Had he somehow become delusional, believing the house itself was a sentient being? Lily, she's part of it now, he murmured, his voice barely audible. She keeps the bad things away. Lily, the other child. He seemed to believe she was still somehow present in the house, a protector. Lily is gone, I said gently. She died. Russell needs to live in the real world, not hidden in the walls. His eyes flashed with anger. You don't understand. The outside, it's dangerous. Here he's safe. He took another step, and I tightened my grip on the poker. Max growled menacingly, his teeth bared. Let him go, I said firmly. It's over. He ignored me, his gaze fixed on Russell. He reached out a thin, trembling hand. Come here, Russell. They'll hurt you. Russell whimpered and clung tighter to my back. The man took another step, and I knew he wasn't going to back down. He seemed completely detached from reality, lost in his own twisted world. I raised the poker higher, ready to defend myself and Russell. Suddenly, a loud crash came from downstairs. It sounded like something heavy had fallen in the living room. The man froze, his eyes widening with fear. He turned his head sharply, listening intently. They're here, he whispered, his voice filled with terror. They found us. Who found us? I asked, confused. He didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the bedroom door. He seemed to be expecting someone. Something. Another crash echoed from downstairs, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Whatever was happening, it was happening fast. The man suddenly darted towards the window, scrambling to open it. He seemed desperate to escape. He's getting away, I yelled. I started to move towards him, but Russell cried out, his grip tightening on my shirt. He was terrified. Max, stop him, I commanded. Max, already agitated by the commotion downstairs, lunged at the man as he struggled with the window latch. He barked and snapped, trying to pull him away from the window. The man cried out in pain as Max's teeth grazed his leg. He stumbled back, giving me the opportunity to move closer. It's over, I repeated, my voice firm. Just let go. But he was beyond reason. His eyes were wild with fear, and he seemed convinced that some unseen force was closing in on him. He suddenly turned and lunged at me, his thin arms flailing, instinctively raised the poker, and it connected with his arm with a sickening thud. He cried out in pain and stumbled back again. Just then, the bedroom door burst open. Sheriff Brody stood in the doorway, his gun drawn. 2 deputies were behind him, their faces grim. Freeze! Don't move! Sheriff Brody commanded. The man stared at them, his eyes wide with disbelief. He seemed to deflate, the fight draining out of him. He slowly raised his hands in surrender. It's over, Sheriff Brody said again, his voice calmer now. You're safe. The deputies moved forward and carefully handcuffed the man. He didn't resist, his gaze distant and unfocused. Sheriff Brody turned to me, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. Sarah, are you all right? I'm okay, I said, my arm throbbing where the knitting needle had grazed me. This is him. He's been keeping Russell hidden. His gaze fell on the small, trembling figure of Russell clinging to my leg. His expression softened. We'll take care of him, Sarah. He's safe now. As the deputies led the man away, Russell finally spoke, his voice small and shaky. He said the house wanted us. Sheriff Brody looked around the room, his brow furrowed. The house? I nodded slowly, remembering the whispers in the hidden chamber, the feeling of a presence. I don't understand it either, but there's something wrong with this house. The events of the past few weeks had been terrifying and surreal. The discovery of the hidden spaces, Russell's captivity, the unsettling behavior of the hidden resident. It all pointed to a darkness that had taken root within the walls of my home. As the police began to secure the scene and tend to Russell, I looked around the master bedroom, my parents' sanctuary, now the site of a disturbing confrontation. The secrets hidden within these walls had finally been brought to light, but a sense of unease still lingered. The house felt different now. The silence no longer just quiet, but heavy with the weight of the past and the lingering presence of something I couldn't quite understand. As they led Russell away, wrapped in a blanket and looking lost and bewildered, I knew that my life had changed forever. The comfortable normalcy I had once known was shattered, replaced by the chilling reality of the darkness that had been living alongside me. And as I stood there, in the middle of my parents' empty bedroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that the secrets of this house were not entirely over. There was still something I didn't understand. Something about the house itself, about Lily, about the strange beliefs of the man who had been living in the walls. The house held more secrets. I could feel it. And somehow, I knew that I would eventually have to uncover them all. The arrest of the man from the walls, whose name the sheriff's deputies eventually managed to coax out as Arthur, brought a strange sort of quiet back to the house. The constant tension, the feeling of being watched, had lifted. Russell was safe, receiving medical care and the gentle attention of social services. But the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was heavy with unanswered questions and a lingering sense of unease. Arthur's ramblings about the house wanting them, Lily becoming part of it, and the dangers of the outside world echoed in my mind. They sounded like the ravings of a madman, yet they were intertwined with the undeniable reality of Russell's long captivity and Lily's tragic death. Sheriff Brody and his team were thorough. They searched every inch of the hidden passages, documenting their layout and collecting any remnants of Arthur's life within the walls. They found more of Russell's drawings and notes, confirming the extent of his isolation and Arthur's controlling behaviour. But they found nothing to definitively explain Arthur's motives or his strange beliefs about the house. The skeletal remains found behind the fireplace were sent for further analysis, hoping to shed more light on Lily's death and her connection to Arthur. As for me, I couldn't bring myself to stay in the house alone. The thought of sleeping in the same rooms where Arthur had lurked, where Russell had suffered, was unbearable. I stayed at the motel, Max a constant comforting presence beside me. Days later, Sheriff Brody called. The medical examiner's report on Lily's remains was inconclusive regarding the cause of death. There were no signs of trauma, suggesting she may have died from illness or neglect. This only deepened the tragedy of her young life, hidden away and forgotten. Arthur, meanwhile, remained uncooperative, his communication fragmented and delusional. He spoke of the house in hushed, reverent tones, as if it were a living entity. He seemed genuinely terrified of the outside world, convinced that the house was the only place of true safety. As the official investigation stalled, my own need for answers grew. I couldn't shake the feeling that Arthur's strange beliefs held a key to understanding the darkness that had permeated my home. I started to delve into the history of the house again, this time focusing on local folklore and any unusual stories associated with the property. I spent hours at the local historical society, poring over old documents and interviewing long-time residents. Most people remembered the house as just another old family home, but a few of the older residents recalled whispers, stories passed down through generations about strange occurrences on the property. Tales of unexplained noises, cold spots, and a general feeling of unease. One elderly woman, Mrs. Henderson, spoke of a local legend about a tragedy that had occurred on the land long before the house was built, the disappearance of 2 young children. The details were vague and fragmented, more like a ghost story than a historical fact. But the mention of 2 missing children sent a shiver down my spine. Could Lily and Russell's fate somehow be echoing a much older tragedy? Mrs. Henderson also mentioned a rumour that the original owner of the land had been eccentric. He was said to have been fascinated by the supernatural and had supposedly incorporated strange architectural elements into the house, believing they would create a connection to the other side. "Just old wives' tales, dear," she had chuckled, but her words planted a seed of a disturbing possibility in my mind. What if there was something about the house itself that had somehow influenced Arthur's delusions, or even contributed to the tragedies that had unfolded within its walls? Driven by this unsettling thought, I decided to return to the house. Max, sensing my determination, followed me in, his usual cautiousness replaced by a quiet alertness. The house felt different now, stripped of its immediate threat but still imbued with a heavy silence. I walked through the empty rooms, trying to see them through new eyes, imagining the hidden world that existed just beyond the plaster and wood. I returned to the den and stood before the sealed fireplace. The smooth brick gave no indication of the hidden tunnel and chamber behind it. It was as if that dark space had never existed, but I knew it had, and I knew that Lily and perhaps even Russell had spent unimaginable time there. I ran my hands along the walls, tapping and listening, trying to discern the subtle differences in sound that might indicate the presence of the hidden passages. The blueprints were still my best guide, but they lacked the detail I needed to truly understand the network of spaces. Then I remembered the notes. They had been hidden in specific locations, almost like markers. Could they lead me to other access, points, other secrets? I started to retrace my steps, revisiting each place where I had found a note. The hallway baseboard, the hollow section beneath the Christmas photo, the loose brick near the top of the fireplace. The opening behind the baseboard led to a narrow, horizontal shaft. I shone my flashlight inside, but it was too small to enter. The opening beneath the Christmas photo led to the vertical shaft I had used to reach Russell. I peered down into the darkness, but it offered no new insights. It was the loose brick near the top of the fireplace that drew my attention again. The small shaft behind it had yielded Russell's toys and notes, heartbreaking remnants of his hidden existence. I reached back inside, my fingers exploring the dusty space. My hand brushed against something I hadn't noticed before, a small, leather-bound book. It was old and worn, its pages brittle with age. Carefully, I pulled it out. The cover was blank, the leather cracked and faded. I opened it, my fingers tracing the delicate script on the first page. It was a journal. The handwriting was elegant and flowing, unlike any of the notes I had found. The first entry was dated over a century ago. It began, "The house breathes. It whispers its secrets in the rustling of the leaves, in the creak of the floorboards. I have sought to understand its language, to tap into the energy that flows beneath its foundations." The journal belonged to the original owner of the land, the eccentric builder Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. As I read further, a disturbing picture began to emerge. He wasn't just interested in the supernatural. He seemed to believe that the land itself possessed a unique energy, a connection to something else. He wrote about constructing the house in a specific way, incorporating hidden chambers and passages, not for storage, but to harness this energy. He believed these spaces would become conduits, allowing him to communicate with spirits. The other side? His entries became increasingly erratic over time, filled with talk of rituals, of trying to open the pathways, of feeling a growing presence within the house. Then there was a gap in the entries, followed by a different, more frantic handwriting. This new hand spoke of fear, of something having gone wrong, of children's cries echoing through the walls. The last entry in this hand was chilling. "It's taken them. The house. It's alive." The journal ended abruptly there. A cold dread washed over me. The old legends, Arthur's delusions, the hidden spaces, they all seemed to connect to this disturbing history. Had the original owner somehow created a place that wasn't just a house, but something more, something that had somehow influenced the tragedies that had unfolded within its walls? And what about the skeleton I had found? Was Lily's death just a tragic consequence of Arthur's madness, or was there something more sinister at play? I looked around the silent den, the ordinary objects suddenly seeming imbued with a dark history. The house didn't just hold secrets. It felt like it was a secret, a silent, watchful entity. Max nudged my hand, his soft whine pulling me back to the present. He seemed restless, his gaze fixed on the sealed fireplace. I knew I couldn't ignore what I had read. The journal offered a terrifying glimpse into the origins of the house's strangeness, and I had a sinking feeling that the secrets weren't over. Yet the house had taken 2 children, and I was still living within its grasp. Sleep offered little respite. My dreams were a jumbled mess of shadowy figures, whispering walls, and the hollow gaze of the child's skeleton. I woke up feeling drained and on edge, the weight of the house's dark history pressing down on me. The motel room felt sterile and temporary. I longed for the familiar comfort of my own bed, yet the thought of returning to that house filled me with a deep unease. Max, usually a picture of relaxed contentment, remained close, his eyes watchful. He seemed to sense my turmoil. Sheriff, Brody called again that morning. The man Arthur had been transferred to a secure psychiatric facility for evaluation. His grip on reality seemed tenuous at best, his ramblings about the house and the others offering no coherent explanation for his actions. The police were still trying to piece together Arthur's past, to understand how he had come to live hidden within the walls and how he had managed to keep Russell captive for so long. Their investigation was focusing on old missing person reports and any potential connections to the house's history. As for the journal, I hadn't told Sheriff Brody about it yet. It felt too personal, too steeped in the house's strange, unsettling energy. I wanted to understand it better myself before sharing its disturbing contents. I spent the morning rereading the fragile pages, trying to decipher the original owner's descent into obsession and the subsequent frantic entries. The phrase, "It's taken them," "the house," "it's alive," resonated with a chilling familiarity. It echoed Arthur's own delusional beliefs and the tragic fate of Lily and Russell. Could the house somehow possess a malevolent energy? Could the hidden spaces, built with a supposed connection to the supernatural in mind, have become something unintended, something predatory? The rational part of my mind scoffed at the idea. Houses weren't alive, they were structures of brick and wood. But the evidence I had encountered, the hidden passages, the long-held secrets, the profound sense of unease, chipped away at my skepticism. I decided to return to the house again, this time with a specific purpose. I wanted to find the place mentioned in the journal, the foundations, where the original owner believed the energy flowed strongest. Perhaps understanding this might shed light on the house's strange influence. Max and I drove back, the familiar route now feeling charged with a new layer of apprehension. As we stepped inside, the silence felt different again, less threatening than before Arthur's capture, but still expectant. I made my way to the oldest part of the house, the original section that the eccentric builder would have constructed first. This was the living room and the adjoining study, where I had found the journal. According to the journal, the builder had believed the energy was strongest beneath the original hearth, the heart of the home. I knelt before the living room fireplace, running my hands along the aged stone. It felt cold and inert. But the journal had also mentioned pathways and conduits. The hidden passages were built into the walls. What about beneath the house? The house had a cellar, a dark and damp space I rarely ventured into. It was accessible through a creaky wooden door in the kitchen. I'd always found it slightly unsettling, filled with the musty smell of earth and forgotten things. Taking a deep breath, I opened the cellar door. A gust of cold, damp air wafted up, carrying a faint, earthy scent. Max whined softly, his ears drooping slightly. He didn't like the cellar. I descended the narrow wooden stairs, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The cellar was small, with a low ceiling and rough stone walls. The dirt floor was uneven and damp in places. The air was heavy and still. Old shelves lined the walls, filled with dusty jars of preserves and forgotten tools. In the center of the room was the brick foundation upon which the house was built. I shone my flashlight along the foundation, looking for anything unusual. The stones were old and weathered, but nothing seemed out of place. Then I noticed it. In one corner Almost hidden behind a stack of empty wooden crates was a section of the foundation that looked slightly different. The stones were darker, and the mortar seemed newer. There was a faint, almost imperceptible seam running along the bottom. Curiosity piqued. I moved closer. I knelt down and ran my fingers along the seam. It felt loose. With a bit of effort, I managed to pry one of the darker stones away. Behind it was a small opening, just large enough to squeeze through. A rush of cold, stale air escaped, carrying a faint metallic odor. Max whined again, a low, insistent sound. He didn't want me to go in there. But the journal's mention of foundations and pathways, combined with this hidden opening, compelled me. Taking a deep breath, I squeezed through the narrow gap, my flashlight beam leading the way. The space beyond was small and cramped. A low tunnel dug into the earth beneath the house. The air was thick with the smell of damp soil and something else. Something ancient and vaguely unsettling. The tunnel sloped downwards slightly. I moved cautiously, my flashlight beam revealing rough earthen walls and a low, uneven ceiling. The silence here was profound, broken only by my own breathing and the soft rustling of something unseen in the darkness ahead. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading me deeper beneath the house. The air grew colder, and the metallic odor intensified. I felt a growing sense of unease, a primal instinct telling me to turn back, but I pressed on, driven by the need to understand the secrets buried beneath my home. Finally, the tunnel opened into a small circular chamber. The air here was icy cold, and the metallic smell was almost overpowering. In the center of the chamber was a dark, still pool of water. And then I saw it. Etched into the earthen wall above the pool were strange symbols. They were unlike anything I had ever seen before, intricate and unsettling. As I shone my flashlight on them, a faint humming sound filled the chamber, a low vibration that seemed to emanate from the pool itself. The water in the pool began to ripple, even though there was no breeze. A sense of dread washed over me. This place felt ancient, powerful, and undeniably wrong. And then, a voice echoed in my mind, not through my ears, but directly into my thoughts. "You have awakened it." I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. Max, who had squeezed through the tunnel after me, whined and pressed against my leg, his body trembling. The humming intensified. The symbols on the wall seemed to glow faintly. The water in the pool swirled faster. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the original owner hadn't just been eccentric. He had tapped into something real, something ancient and powerful that lay dormant beneath the house. And somehow, his actions had awakened it. And it had taken Lily, and it had held Russell captive, and now I had awakened it again. The voice in my head was clear, undeniable. "You have awakened it." It wasn't a sound that traveled through the air, but a thought planted directly in my consciousness, cold and resonant. Panic seized me. I stumbled backward, away from the rippling pool and the glowing symbols. Max whined frantically, his fur bristling, and pressed himself against my legs, a solid anchor in the swirling fear. "What? What was that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The humming intensified, and the feeling of a malevolent presence in the chamber grew stronger. It felt ancient, patient, and now aware. I had to get out. Now. I turned and scrambled back towards the narrow tunnel entrance, my flashlight beam shaking wildly. Max squeezed through ahead of me, his frantic whimpers echoing in the confined space. The tunnel seemed longer, darker, more oppressive than before. The earthy smell was now overlaid with a cloying sweetness, a sickening reminder of Russell's captivity and the unseen entity that had held him. We burst back into the cold, damp cellar, gasping for breath. The air here felt almost clean in comparison to the oppressive atmosphere of the chamber below. I didn't hesitate. I replaced the loose stone in the foundation, sealing the hidden passage. The humming faded slightly, but the feeling of being watched, of having stirred something ancient and dangerous, remained. We retreated from the cellar, Max staying close by my side, his body still tense. Back in the relative normalcy of the kitchen, I leaned against the counter, trying to catch my breath and make sense of what had just happened. The journal, the symbols, the voice in my head. It all pointed to something far beyond Arthur's madness. The house wasn't just a building, it was a vessel, perhaps even a conduit, for something else. But what was it? And what did it want? The memory of Lily's remains flashed through my mind. Had she been a victim of this entity? Had Russell been next? I had to get out of the house. It wasn't safe here, not anymore. I grabbed my keys and Max's leash, my hands shaking. As we reached the front door, I hesitated. Where would I go? The motel felt temporary, and the thought of leaving my home indefinitely was unsettling. But the alternative, staying in a place that felt increasingly hostile, was unthinkable. As I opened the door, a glint of red caught my eye on the porch. It was another drawing, left leaning against the door frame. Drawn in the same faded red crayon I had seen in the hidden chamber, it depicted a simple stick figure with wide, frightened eyes, and beside it, a single word: go. My blood ran cold. The entity in the house was communicating. It wanted me to leave. Was it trying to protect itself? Or was it warning me? Fear warred with a desperate need to understand. Was this the something bad Arthur had been so afraid of? Was the house itself the danger? I looked back at the house, its familiar facade now seeming menacing. The windows looked like vacant eyes staring out at me. We're leaving, boy, I murmured to Max, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. We're not staying here anymore. We drove back to the motel. The image of the red crayon drawing burned into my mind. The message was clear. But why? I spent the next few days in a state of anxious uncertainty. Sheriff Brody continued his investigation, but without Arthur's coherent testimony, progress was slow. The focus had shifted to understanding Arthur's past and any potential connection to the house's history that might explain his actions. I couldn't shake the feeling that the key to everything lay not with Arthur, but with the house itself and the disturbing history revealed in the journal. One afternoon, while researching local historical records online, I stumbled upon an old map of the town dating back to the early 1900s, around the time the house was built. The map showed the original layout of the land, including a small stream that ran behind the property. Intrigued, I cross-referenced this with the journal's entries. The original owner had mentioned the stream, believing its flow was connected to the Earth's energy. He had even described diverting a small part of it to run beneath the foundations of the house, believing it would amplify the energy he sought to harness. The pool in the chamber beneath the cellar, could it be connected to this diverted stream? The metallic odor I had smelled, could it be minerals leaching from the earth into the water? And the symbols on the wall, were they part of the original owner's attempts to tap into the supernatural? Had to see the stream. Following the old map, I drove to the back of my property. The area was overgrown with trees and brush, but I eventually found the remnants of a small stream bed. It was mostly dry now, just a shallow trickle of water in some places. I followed the dry bed, pushing through the undergrowth. It led towards the back of the house, and then I saw it, a patch of disturbed earth, as if something had been recently dug up. Hesitantly, I moved closer. The soil was loose and dark, and then I saw a piece of rotted wood sticking out of the ground. My heart pounded in my chest. Could this be another hidden entrance? I started to dig with my bare hands, the soil crumbling easily. Soon I uncovered a section of old, weathered wood, a hatch of some kind. With a surge of adrenaline, I pulled it open. A dark, musty opening stared back at me, leading downwards. The air that wafted out was cold and damp, carrying the same faint metallic odor I had smelled in the chamber beneath the cellar. Max whined and nudged my hand, his eyes filled with concern. I knew I should call the police, but the urge to understand, to uncover the final secrets of the house, was too strong to resist. Taking a deep breath, I turned on my phone's flashlight and descended into the darkness. The air grew colder with each step. The metallic odor intensified. The passage was narrow and sloped downwards, just like the tunnel beneath the cellar. It felt like I was entering the earth itself. Finally, the passage opened into another small chamber. This one was also circular, and in the center was another pool of dark, still water. The same strange symbols were etched into the earthen walls, glowing faintly in the beam of my flashlight, and then I saw it. Lying at the edge of the pool, partially submerged in the dark water, was another small skeleton, smaller than Lily's. A wave of nausea washed over me. 3 children. What had happened here? As I stared at the tiny remains, the voice echoed in my mind again, stronger this time, laced with a sense of ancient sorrow. They are all part of it now. I stumbled back, my flashlight beam shaking. 3 children. The original owner's obsession. The hidden passages. The malevolent presence beneath the house. The pieces of the puzzle were finally coming together, revealing a terrifying truth far more complex and disturbing than I could have ever imagined. The house wasn't just haunted by memories. It was something else entirely. Something ancient. Something hungry. And I was trapped within its grasp. The sight of the second small skeleton lying beside the dark pool sent a fresh wave of horror crashing over me. 3 children. The original owner's descent into madness. The house's insidious influence. It was a tapestry of tragedy woven through generations. The voice in my mind, they are all part of it now, echoed with a chilling finality. What did it mean to be part of it? Were Lily and these other 2 children somehow absorbed into the entity beneath the house? I had to get out of this place. Now. Turning, I scrambled back through the narrow earthen passage, Max close behind. The air felt thick and heavy, the silence amplifying the frantic beating of my heart. We emerged from the hidden hatch behind the house, gasping for breath in the relatively fresh air. The overgrown yard suddenly felt like a sanctuary compared to the suffocating darkness below. I slammed the hatch shut, covering it with the loose earth as best I could. I didn't want anyone else stumbling upon that horrifying discovery. My mind raced, trying to process the implications of what I had seen and heard. The journal suggested the original owner had intentionally tried to tap into some kind of energy beneath the land, building the house and its hidden passages as conduits. Had his experiments gone horribly wrong, awakening something that craved life, that took children? And what about Arthur? Had he somehow become a thrall to this entity, driven by its influence to keep Russell hidden, perhaps even believing he was protecting him? His ramblings about the house being alive, and Lily being part of it now, suddenly seemed less like madness and more like a twisted understanding of a terrifying reality. I had to tell Sheriff Brody everything. The journal, the second skeleton, the voice in my head. It all painted a picture far more complex and sinister than a simple case of kidnapping. Back at the motel, I laid out the fragile journal on the bed, its aged pages whispering tales of obsession and tragedy. Max sat beside me, his head resting. On my lap, a silent source of comfort. When Sheriff Brody arrived, I was still reeling from my discoveries. I recounted everything: the journal, the diverted stream, the hidden chamber beneath the yard, the second skeleton, and the chilling voice in my mind. He listened intently, his initial skepticism slowly giving way to a look of grim concern. The discovery of a second set of remains corroborated my increasingly unbelievable story. "We need to excavate that area behind your house, Sarah," he said, his voice serious. "And we need to take a closer look at the foundations, see if there are any other hidden passages." The following day, The area behind my house became a scene of intense activity. Forensic teams carefully excavated the site, uncovering the hidden hatch and the passage below. They recovered the remains of the second child, handling them with the utmost care. The discovery sent shockwaves through the small town, reopening the cold case of Russell Hayes and adding another layer of tragedy to the history of my home. Meanwhile, another team of investigators meticulously examined the cellar. Following my description of the loose stone in the foundation, they discovered the hidden tunnel and the chamber with the pool and the strange symbols. Sheriff Brody brought in experts, archaeologists, parapsychologists, even a historian specializing in local folklore. They examined the symbols, the construction of the hidden spaces, and the legends surrounding the original owner. The archaeologists couldn't identify the symbols, noting their unique and seemingly archaic design. The parapsychologist, a woman with a thoughtful demeanor, spoke of ley lines and energy vortices, suggesting that the original owner might have been trying to tap into naturally occurring energy points beneath the land. The historian confirmed the eccentric nature of the original owner and the local legends of tragedy and strange occurrences associated with the property. As the experts delved deeper, I found myself increasingly drawn to the idea that the house wasn't just a passive structure. The journal spoke of the land possessing energy, of the builder trying to harness it. Could his actions have somehow created or amplified something malevolent? The voice in my head remained a chilling reminder of the unknown entity that seemed connected to the house. It hadn't spoken again, but I felt its presence, a cold, watchful awareness that permeated the very air around me. Russell, meanwhile, was slowly starting to heal, both physically and emotionally, in the care of his surviving relatives. He remembered little of his captivity, his memories fragmented and clouded, but he often spoke of a cold, dark place and a feeling of being watched. He also had vivid memories of a small girl named Lily. The discovery of the second skeleton confirmed Lily's existence and her tragic fate. But who was the third child? There were no records of another missing child connected to the house or the Hayes family. The mystery deepened, the layers of tragedy and the unsettling presence beneath the house becoming increasingly intertwined. One evening, as I sat in the motel room, rereading the journal, a passage I had previously overlooked caught my eye. The original owner had written about a ritual, a binding he had attempted to perform in the chamber beneath the cellar, using the diverted stream and specific symbols to amplify the land's energy and create a permanent connection. He had written of needing a vessel, something pure and innocent, to complete the binding. The entry ended abruptly, mid-sentence. A horrifying realization dawned on me. The children, Lily, the second unknown child, and perhaps even Russell. Had they been intended as vessels? Had the original owner's ritual gone horribly wrong, creating the entity that now resided beneath the house, feeding on life and trapping souls? And the pool? Was it the focal point of this twisted ritual, the conduit through which the entity communicated? The voice in my head. They are all part of it now. It wasn't just about taking lives. It was about absorption, about becoming part of the entity itself. The red crayon drawings, the single word, go. Was the entity trying to protect itself by driving me away? Or was there a more sinister motive? I looked at Max, who was whimpering softly, his gaze fixed on the motel room door. He seemed agitated, sensing something I couldn't. A sudden chill filled the room, despite the warm evening air. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. The voice echoed in my mind again, stronger than before, laced with an undeniable hunger. You are the last. The chilling words echoed in my mind, a cold pronouncement that sent a wave of icy dread through me. The last of what? The last of the Hayes family in the house? The last one capable of uncovering its secrets? Or the last potential vessel for its insatiable hunger? Max whined again, a low guttural sound that mirrored my own fear. He pressed against my leg, his body trembling. He felt it too, this growing sense of dread, this palpable shift in the atmosphere of the motel room. The air grew colder, the silence amplifying the frantic beating of my heart. I scanned the room, my eyes darting to every shadow, every flicker of movement in the periphery. There was nothing, just the sterile furniture and the closed curtains. But the feeling of being watched, of being targeted, was overwhelming. It was as if the entity beneath the house had reached out, its influence stretching beyond the physical confines of the property. I had to get away. The motel no longer felt safe. The house was a trap, and its influence seemed to be spreading. "We're leaving, boy," I whispered to Max, my voice barely audible. "Right now." I grabbed my purse and keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip them. Max was already by the door, his tail tucked low, his eyes wide with apprehension. We fled the motel room, not stopping until we were in the relative anonymity of my car. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I couldn't stay in town. The house's presence felt too strong here, its dark history woven into the very fabric of the community. I drove aimlessly for hours, Max a silent passenger beside me. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, I finally pulled over at a small, roadside diner in a neighboring county. The normalcy of the bustling diner, the smell of coffee and frying bacon, offered a temporary reprieve from the terror that had consumed my life. But even here, surrounded by strangers, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the echo of that chilling voice in my mind. Over lukewarm coffee, I tried to make sense of everything. The original owner's obsession, the ritual, the trapped children, the entity beneath the house. It was a horrifying tapestry of the supernatural and the deeply human capacity for cruelty. The journal had spoken of a binding, needing a vessel. Lily and the other unknown child had likely been victims of this twisted ritual. Had Russell somehow escaped that fate, only to be held captive by Arthur, perhaps another pawn of the entity? And now, the entity seemed to have turned its attention to me. You are the last of what it needed, the last obstacle in its path. I had to understand the nature of this entity, its goals, its weaknesses. The journal was my only source of information, but it ended abruptly, leaving the ritual unfinished, the outcome unknown. I needed to go back to the house. As terrifying as the thought was, it held the answers I desperately needed. Taking Max with me, I drove back towards town, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. As we approached my property, an unsettling stillness hung in the air. The police tape was gone. The forensic teams had left. The house stood silent and seemingly empty. Hesitantly, I parked in the driveway. Max whined and resisted when I opened the car door. He didn't want to go back inside. "I know, boy," I murmured, stroking his fur. "But we have to. There are still things we need to find." The house felt colder than usual as we stepped inside. The silence was heavy, expectant. The air carried a faint, almost imperceptible hum, a subtle vibration that resonated deep within my bones. I made my way to the study, where I had found the journal. I reread the final chilling entries, focusing on the description of the ritual and the mention of a vessel. The original owner had believed the diverted stream and the symbols were crucial to amplifying the land's energy. The pools beneath the house seemed to be the focal points, and the children, they were the vessels. But for what? To complete the binding. To give the entity a stronger connection to this world. I had to find the ritual site again, the chamber beneath the cellar. Perhaps there were more clues there, something the police had overlooked. Max followed me reluctantly as I made my way to the kitchen and opened the cellar door. The cold, damp air wafted up, carrying that familiar earthy scent. The humming was slightly stronger here. Descending the creaky stairs, I felt the oppressive atmosphere of the cellar close in around me. The darkness seemed deeper, the shadows more alive. I moved towards the loose stone in the foundation, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. As I reached it, I noticed something new. Etched into the dirt floor near the opening was another of those strange symbols, glowing faintly in the beam of my light. My heart pounded in my chest. The entity was active. It knew I was here. Taking a deep breath, I removed the stone and squeezed through the narrow opening into the earthen tunnel. The humming was louder here, almost a palpable vibration. The air was icy cold, and the metallic odor was overpowering. Max whined and hesitated at the entrance, refusing to follow. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, but my own voice trembled. I moved, cautiously through the tunnel, the glowing symbols on the walls seeming to pulse with a faint light. The feeling of being watched was intense, as if unseen eyes were boring into me from the darkness. Finally, I reached the circular chamber. The pool in the center was swirling violently, its dark surface reflecting the faint glow of the symbols on the walls. The humming was deafening now, a resonant drone that filled my head. And then I saw it. Rising slowly from the depths of the pool was a shimmering, indistinct form. It seemed to coalesce from the dark water, its shape shifting and fluid. Fear gripped me, cold and paralyzing. This was it, the entity. It had no discernible features, just a swirling mass of shadow and light. But I could feel its presence, its ancient hunger, its overwhelming power. The voice echoed in my mind, amplified now, filled with an insatiable desire. The binding will be complete. It reached out a tendril of shadow towards me, and I knew, with terrifying certainty, what it wanted. It wanted me to be the last vessel. The entity's words hung in the freezing air of the chamber, a chilling promise. Its amorphous form pulsed with a dark energy, the swirling shadows reaching towards me like hungry tendrils. I stumbled back, my flashlight beam wavering, the metallic tang in the air thick and suffocating. Max, despite his fear, pushed forward, placing himself between me and the pool, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His loyalty, his unwavering protectiveness, gave me a sliver of courage in the face of overwhelming terror. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely a whisper against the deafening hum. The entity didn't speak aloud, but the thought echoed in my mind, cold and insistent. The binding must be completed. The cycle must continue. Cycle? Binding? The original owner's journal flashed through my mind, his desperate attempts to harness the land's energy, the need for a vessel. Had his ritual created something that required a constant influx of life force to sustain itself? Were the children's sacrifices in some twisted ongoing process? The shimmering tendril of shadow inched closer. I could feel a coldness emanating from it, a sense of emptiness that threatened to consume me. I had to fight back. But with what? A flashlight? My bare hands? Max's teeth? It felt futile. Then I remembered the journal, the original owner's attempts to control the entity. Had he left any clues, any weaknesses? Frantically, I tried to recall the details of the ritual, the diverted stream, the symbols, the vessel. The stream ran beneath the house, feeding the pools. The symbols were etched into the walls of both chambers. And the vessels, the children. Could disrupting the stream break the connection? Could destroying the symbols weaken its power? It was a desperate gamble, but it was all I had. "Max, stay close," I whispered, my eyes fixed on the entity. I turned and scrambled back through the tunnel, towards the cellar. The humming seemed to follow me, the oppressive presence still looming in my mind. Reaching the cellar, I didn't hesitate. I found the section of the diverted stream, a small, trickling flow of water that ran along a shallow channel in the dirt floor, eventually disappearing beneath a section of the foundation. Working quickly, I began to pile rocks and debris into the channel, trying to dam the flow. The cold water seeped into my clothes, but I ignored the discomfort, driven by a desperate urgency. As the flow of water slowed, The humming in the cellar seemed to lessen slightly. A flicker of hope ignited within me. I moved back towards the opening to the lower chamber. Max whined and nudged my hand, but I shook my head. "Not yet, boy. We're not done." Squeezing back through the tunnel, I returned to the chamber with the pool. The entity still shimmered in the center, its shadowy form less defined now, its movements slower. The humming was noticeably quieter. The glowing symbols on the wall seemed dimmer. Perhaps disrupting the stream was weakening its connection. Now, for the symbols. They were etched into the hard-packed earth. I had nothing to destroy them with. Then I remembered the sharp, loose rocks in the tunnel. I scrambled back again, collecting as many sharp-edged stones as I could carry. Returning to the chamber, I began to scrape at the glowing symbols, digging into the earthen walls. Dust and dirt filled the air, making it hard to breathe. The entity pulsed weakly in the center of the pool, its shadowy tendrils retracting slightly. The humming fluctuated, its intensity waning and surging. As I scratched at the final symbol, the humming abruptly ceased. The glowing faded from the walls. The water in the pool stilled. The shimmering form of the entity flickered and then vanished, leaving only the dark, still water. A profound silence descended upon the chamber, broken only by my ragged breathing and Max's soft whines as he finally joined me, nudging my hand with his wet nose. Had it worked? Was it gone? The oppressive presence in my mind had vanished. The coldness in the air had dissipated. The chamber felt empty. But the sight of the small skeleton at the edge of the pool was a stark reminder of the tragedy that had occurred here. The entity might be gone, but the pain and loss remained. I knew I couldn't leave the remains here. They deserved to be found, to be given a proper burial. Carefully, I gathered the fragile bones, wrapping them in my scarf. Max stayed close, nudging my hand, as if offering comfort. We made our way back to the surface, the weight of the small bundle in my arms a heavy reminder of the lives the house had claimed. Back in the relative normalcy of the house, I called Sheriff Brody. I told him everything that had happened in the chamber below, the symbols, the fading presence, the discovery of the third set of remains. He arrived with his deputies, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and grim understanding. They secured the area behind the house and began the process of carefully excavating the chamber beneath the yard. The discovery of the third skeleton confirmed the extent of the tragedy linked to the house. The remains were sent for identification, another lost child finally brought to light. As the police continued their investigation, focusing on the original owner's history and any other potential victims, I knew my time in the house was over. The darkness that had clung to it for so long had finally been confronted, but the scars remained. I made arrangements to sell the property. I couldn't bear to live there anymore, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the lingering memory of the entity beneath. Max and I moved into a small apartment in a different part of town. The silence there was peaceful, the air clean. Max slept soundly, no longer pacing or growling in the night. Weeks later, I received a final update from Sheriff Brody. They had identified the third child through old dental records, another young boy who had disappeared without a trace decades ago. The original owner's journal, combined with the physical evidence, painted a horrifying picture of his descent into madness and the tragic consequences of his twisted rituals. Arthur remained in the psychiatric facility, his delusions about the house persisting. He was deemed unfit to stand trial. The house was eventually sold to a developer who planned to demolish it and build new homes on the land. Part of me felt a sense of closure at the thought of the old house being torn down, the darkness buried, beneath finally eradicated. But another part of me would always remember the secrets it held, the lost children and the chilling encounter in the chamber below. Sometimes late at night, Max would lift his head and look towards the empty space where the house once stood. He would listen intently for a moment, and then he would sigh and rest his head on my lap, and in the silence, I would listen too, for the echoes of the past, for the whispers of the children, who were finally at peace, and for the lingering memory of the darkness that had once resided beneath my home. The house was gone, but the lessons it had taught me, the darkness I had faced, would stay with me forever. And I knew, with a quiet certainty, that Max and I would always remember the children who were finally free. The weight of the small skeleton in my arms was a tangible reminder of the horrors the house had concealed for so long. As Max and I emerged from the hidden hatch, the overgrown yard felt strangely peaceful, bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. I knew I couldn't keep this discovery to myself. Sheriff Brody needed to know about the third child, the depth of the tragedy that had unfolded beneath my home. The call to the sheriff was brief and to the point. My voice, though still shaken, held a newfound resolve. There was no more room for doubt or disbelief. The truth, however horrifying, had been unearthed. Sheriff Brody arrived quickly, his expression grave as I led him to the hidden hatch. The forensic team followed soon after, their presence a stark contrast to the quiet stillness of the yard. The excavation of the second hidden chamber was a somber affair. The recovery of the tiny skeletal remains was handled with meticulous care, each bone a silent testament to a life tragically cut short. As the forensic team worked, I recounted everything I had experienced in the chamber: the glowing symbols, the humming, the chilling voice, and the feeling of an ancient, malevolent presence. Sheriff Brody listened intently, his initial skepticism replaced by a look of grim understanding. The discovery of the third set of remains sent another wave of shock through the town. The local news picked up the story, the history of my house becoming a dark and unsettling mystery. The identity of the third child remained unknown for the time being, another lost soul swallowed by the shadows of the past. Days turned into a blur of police interviews, forensic analysis, and the quiet grief that settled over me. The weight of the house's history felt immense, a burden I carried with every waking moment. The experts continued their investigation into the symbols and the original owner's journal. The parapsychologist theorized that the ritual might have inadvertently created a negative energy vortex beneath the house, a focal point for something dark and predatory. The diverted stream, the symbols, and the intended vessels, the children, could have inadvertently fed and strengthened this entity over time. The voice I had heard, she suggested, might have been a manifestation of this energy, a primal intelligence seeking to perpetuate its existence. As for Arthur, his mental state remained unchanged. He continued to speak of the house as a living entity, of Lily being part of it, and of the dangers of the outside world. He seemed trapped in his own delusional reality, a tragic figure caught in the house's dark web. The police investigation expanded, delving into decades-old missing person reports, hoping to identify the third child and uncover any other potential victims connected to the house or the original owner. Meanwhile, I made the difficult decision to finalize the sale of the property. Staying there was no longer an option. The memories, the lingering sense of unease, were too overwhelming. Max and I found a small apartment on the other side of town, a clean, neutral space that offered a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Max seemed to sense the change, his anxiety slowly receding, his sleep no longer troubled. Weeks later, Sheriff Brody called with a final update. They had managed to identify the third child through old school records, another young boy who had disappeared in the 1950s. There were no direct links found between the three children and the Hayes family, suggesting they were likely victims of the original owner's twisted obsession, or the entity it had inadvertently created. The original owner himself had died decades ago in a mental institution, his final years marked by increasing delusion and paranoia. The official investigation concluded, the tragic events attributed to a combination of the original owner's madness and the horrific consequences of his actions. The entity beneath the house remained an unexplained anomaly, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that might exist in the world. The sale of the house went through, the property changing hands with the promise of demolition and new beginnings. As I signed the final papers, I felt a sense of closure, a hope that the darkness that had clung to that land for so long would finally be eradicated. A few weeks after we moved into the apartment, I received a letter. It was from Grant Hayes, Russell's grandfather. He thanked me for uncovering the truth about Russell and for bringing some measure of peace to their family after decades of uncertainty. He also mentioned the discovery of Lily's remains and the identification of the third child, expressing his deep sorrow for the lives that had been lost. He wrote about Russell's slow but steady recovery, his memories gradually returning, no longer clouded by fear. He was starting to laugh again, to play, to rediscover the joy of being a child. His letter brought tears to my eyes. Despite the horrors I had witnessed, something good had come of it. Russell was safe, and the truth, however painful, had finally been brought to light for the other lost children as well. Life in the apartment settled into a quiet routine. Max slept soundly at the foot of my bed, his presence a constant source of comfort. The nightmares eventually faded, replaced by a sense of quiet resilience. Sometimes, late at night, Max would lift his head and look towards the window, his ears twitching slightly. He would listen for a moment, a soft sigh escaping his chest, and then he would settle back down, and in the silence, I would listen too. Not for the humming, not for the whispers of a malevolent entity, but for the quiet echoes of the past, for the memory of the children who were finally at peace. The house was gone, reduced to rubble. The land would be cleansed, new homes built on the foundations of the old. But the lessons I had learned, the darkness I had faced, and the memory of the children would stay with me. And I knew, with a quiet certainty, that Max and I would always remember. We would remember the pouring at the photo, the hidden notes, the terrifying journey into the darkness beneath the house. We would remember Lily and the two lost boys, finally free from the shadows that had held them captive for so long. And in their memory, we would find our own peace. Life after the house felt strangely muted. The vibrant colours of the outside world seemed a stark contrast to the perpetual twilight and chilling secrets I had unearthed. Max and I settled into our small apartment, the silence a welcome change from the whispers and hums that had permeated our old home. The sheriff's investigation concluded with a sense of uneasy closure. Russell's disappearance was officially ruled a tragic accident. The circumstances of his death lost to time, and the hidden nature of the chamber. Lily and the third child remained unsolved mysteries, their fates inextricably linked to the eccentric, original owner and the strange architecture of the house. Grant Hayes' letter was a balm to my wounded spirit. He expressed profound gratitude for bringing Russell home, even in death. He found some solace in knowing what had happened, the decades of uncertainty finally replaced by a heartbreaking truth. He didn't press for details about the entity or the more fantastical elements of my story, accepting that some things would remain beyond understanding. I never spoke publicly about the voice in my head or the shimmering form in the pool. It felt too unreal, too personal, a secret I would carry with me. The journal, after I had transcribed its contents for the sheriff, remained tucked away in a box, a chilling testament to the darkness that had once resided beneath my feet. Old house was demolished, reduced to a pile of rubble and dust. As I drove by the empty lot one last time, a sense of finality washed over me. Whatever had been there was gone, the land cleared for something new. Max, too, seemed to sense the change. His restless pacing ceased. His sleep became deep and untroubled. The anxious watchfulness in his eyes softened, replaced by the familiar, gentle gaze of my loyal companion. Yet, the memory of Russell lingered, his small spectral form pointing towards the wall, the red crayon drawing of Max with the word guide. He had been trapped for so long, his existence a secret, held captive by the house. One evening, as Max and I sat in the quiet of our apartment, a familiar stirring caught my attention. Max lifted his head, his ears twitching, his gaze fixed on the empty corner of the living room. A faint shimmer appeared in the air, a a translucent form slowly coalescing. It was Russell. He looked older than the last time I had seen him, no longer the frightened child from the hidden chamber. His eyes were clear and calm, filled with a gentle light. He smiled, a soft, ethereal expression that radiated peace. He looked around the small apartment, a sense of quiet curiosity on his face. I didn't feel fear, only a profound sense of understanding. He had been tied to the house, to the entity beneath it. With its destruction, he was finally free, able to move on. He looked at Max, a soft affection in his gaze. Max whined softly and nudged his head towards the shimmering form. Then, Russell turned to me, his eyes filled with gratitude. He mouthed a silent word. "Thank you." And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, he began to fade. The shimmer dissipated, the corner of the room returning to normal. Max sighed contentedly and rested his head on my lap. I understood then. Russell wasn't forgotten. He had been heard, and the house, whatever it had been, had finally released him. His spirit was free. Life continued. The seasons changed. The memory of the house and its dark secrets began to recede, replaced by the quiet rhythm of our new life. Max and I took long walks in the park, the sun warm on our faces, the sounds of laughter and life filling the air. We found a sense of normalcy again, a peace that had been absent for so long. But the experience had changed me. I was more aware of the unseen, the hidden currents that might flow beneath the surface of the ordinary. I carried a quiet understanding of the darkness that could take root in the most familiar places. And I carried the memory of Russell, a gentle reminder of the importance of being heard, of the enduring power of hope, even in the face of unimaginable darkness. Sometimes late at night, Max would still lift his head and look towards an empty space, a faint twitch in his ears. He would listen for a moment, and then he would sigh and rest his head on my lap. And in the silence, I would listen too. Not for the echoes of fear, but for the quiet whisper of peace, for the knowledge that Russell was finally free and that, even in the darkest of places, light could eventually find its way. The guide had led us through the shadows, and now we could finally rest. The silence in the apartment remained a comforting balm, a stark contrast to the oppressive quiet of the old house. Max, finally free from the unseen anxieties that had plagued him, settled into a peaceful rhythm. The occasional twitch of his ears in the night, the soft sigh escaping his chest, no longer carried a sense of unease, but rather a quiet acknowledgement of a memory now fading. Life began to reclaim its normalcy. I found a new job, a quiet administrative role that allowed me to focus and rebuild a sense of routine. The days unfolded with a predictable rhythm, a welcome change from the constant state of alert I had been in for weeks. Yet, the events in the house had left an indelible mark. The fragility of reality, the unseen forces that might lurk beneath the surface of the ordinary, were lessons etched into my very being. I found myself more observant, more attuned to subtle shifts in atmosphere, the unspoken energies that sometimes lingered in a space. The memory of Russell's ethereal visit remained vivid, a silent confirmation that the house had held more than just physical secrets. His peaceful demeanor, his silent gratitude, offered a sense of closure that the official investigation could not. He was free, and in his freedom, I found a measure of my own. Grant Hayes' occasional letters became a source of quiet connection. He wrote of Russell's continued healing, the light slowly returning to his eyes. He never explicitly mentioned the more supernatural aspects of my account, but his words held an unspoken understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the profound impact of the events. He found comfort in knowing his grandson's long silence had finally been broken, even if the truth was heartbreaking. The demolition of the old house was completed. The land was cleared, ready for new construction. Driving past the empty lot no longer evoked the same sense of dread. Instead, It felt like a chapter closed, a darkness finally laid to rest. One cool autumn evening, as Max and I walked through the park, the leaves crunching beneath our feet, I paused by an old oak tree. A small, red leaf, the color of Russell's crayon, fluttered down and landed at my feet. A wave of sadness washed over me, quickly followed by a sense of peace. It wasn't a haunting, but a gentle reminder, a whisper from the past. Russell was okay. He was finally at rest. Max nudged my hand with his wet nose, his warm brown eyes, filled with a familiar comfort. He seemed to understand the moment, a silent acknowledgement of the bond we shared, forged in the heart of that darkness. Time continued its steady march. The sharp edges of the memories softened, becoming a part of my story, a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the unexpected bonds that can form in the face of unimaginable circumstances. I never forgot the lessons learned in that old house, the importance of listening to the quiet nudges of intuition, the unwavering loyalty of a true companion, and the enduring power of hope in the face of despair. Max remained my steadfast shadow, his presence a constant source of grounding and love. The pawing at unseen spots on the wall never returned. His once troubled sleep was now filled with soft snores and the occasional twitch of his paws as he chased squirrels in his dreams. Sometimes, late at night, as the city outside hummed with a distant energy, Max would lift his head, his ears twitching almost imperceptibly. He would listen for a moment, a soft sigh escaping his chest, and then settle back down, his warmth a comforting weight beside me. And in the silence, I would listen too. Not for the echoes of fear or the whispers of the past, but for the quiet rhythm of life, for the steady beat of hope that had taken root in the space where darkness had once resided. The guide had led us through the shadows, and now we walked forward, together, into the light. The house was gone, but the bond forged within its walls, the memory of Russell's peaceful release, and the unwavering love of my loyal companion, would remain with me always. The apartment remained our sanctuary, a space filled with the quiet companionship of Max and the gentle rhythm of a life pieced back together. The old house, the darkness it held, receded further with each passing day, becoming a strange and unsettling memory, like a vivid nightmare slowly losing its grip on reality. Yet, the lessons learned in that haunted place lingered. The intuitive nudges I had learned to trust, Max's unwavering sensitivity to the unseen, and the profound understanding of the interconnectedness of past and present remained a part of me. The world felt subtly different, imbued with a layer of mystery I hadn't noticed before. Grant Hayes's letters continued, offering glimpses into Russell's healing journey. He wrote of a child slowly rediscovering the simple joys of life, his laughter echoing in a home that had once been filled with unbearable silence. The shadow of the past would always linger, but the light was returning. The fate of Lily and the third child remained a poignant reminder of the house's tragic history. Their stories, though incomplete, were no longer entirely lost. They had been acknowledged, their existence brought out of the shadows, their memory honored in the quiet spaces of my mind. The land where the old house once stood remained empty for a long time. There were rumors of the developer encountering unexpected difficulties, strange delays and setbacks that seemed to defy logical explanation. Eventually, the project was abandoned, the land left to return to nature. Perhaps, I thought, some places held on to their secrets more stubbornly than others. Life with Max settled into a comfortable routine. Our walks in the park became a cherished ritual, a connection to the living world that had felt so distant during those terrifying weeks. The changing seasons painted the landscape in vibrant hues, a constant reminder of the cycles of life and renewal. Max grew older, his muzzle flecked with grey, his steps a little slower, but his loyalty remained unwavering, his presence a steady anchor in my life. The intuitive connection we had forged in the face of the unknown deepened, a silent understanding that transcended words. Sometimes, Late at night, as the city hummed its lullaby, Max would lift his head, his ears twitching, almost imperceptibly towards a darkened corner of the room. He would listen for a moment, a soft sigh escaping his chest, and then settle back down, his warmth a familiar comfort beside me, and in the silence, I would listen too. Not for the echoes of fear or the whispers of the past, but for the quiet murmur of life, for the steady beat of peace that had finally taken root in my heart. The guide had led us through the shadows, and though the darkness had left its mark, it had also illuminated the enduring power of love, loyalty, and the courage to face the unknown. The house was gone, but the lessons it taught us, the bond we shared, and the memory of the children finally at peace would remain with us, a quiet testament to the mysteries that lie just beyond the veil of our everyday world. And in that quiet remembrance, we found our own enduring peace.